Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of the originals, the latest episode of Grimm, as well as the latest episode of Sleepy Hollow. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows I'm talking about. So for example, if you want to hear what I have to say about this week's episode of the originals, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Grimm and/or Sleepy Hollow. Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is this week's episode of the originals. So in this episode, we have the Mikaelson family has gathered together and they've come to get Klaus back. But Marcel knows that they're on their way, and the fact is that, obviously that Haley got the cure that she needed to wake the others up, and that they're coming to get Klaus back. There are many different interesting developments because we have, well, obviously, for one, we have Josh being caught in the middle, which his new boyfriend is, I think it's his name because it's been a while, Danny from Teen Wolf. It's actually interesting enough when you actually break it down. No. Well, it's a whole, if you really think about it, because his character Danny was dating one of the twins in Teen Wolf, and one of the twins' name was Aiden, and Josh's ex-boyfriend who died was in that season 2. His name was Aiden, so it's just kind of a weird thing. I can never remember the other twin name. I always remember Aiden's name. I never remember the one that was dating Danny. But nevertheless, that was kind of interesting to me. I was like, hey, it's kind of interesting enough too, because he was a human in Teen Wolf and he turns out to be a human in this one. I was wondering if he's a vampire, but no, it turns out not to be the case. Obviously, the Mikaelson family is coming towards him because it's like, okay, you're the closest confidant that Marcel has, so you're going to be able to tell us what's what. So it's all about trying to free Klaus, which at the same time, it's a very sad thing you see is Klaus basically is stuck in his own mind, obviously because of the knife in his chest, and he's seeing Cammy, and the way Cammy, obviously she's being the rat, because she's kind of she represents his brain. She's just a figment of his imagination, being like, yeah, I'm a creation by your brain. And she talks from a very, obviously, like, Cammy was a very smart therapist, so she's kind of, this imaginary Cammy is kind of speaking on the same kind of wavelength that the real Cammy would, and it's basically like bringing up the fact is that, like, you're saying you can endure this pain, but can you endure the loneliness? That's kind of why I'm here, because it's like, it's like, why did you antagonize Marcel? It's because when he originally got stabbed 5 years ago, he created Cammy as a means of dealing with his loneliness, so he wouldn't be alone. If he has to suffer through the pain for his family, then he will suffer through it. But just that pain is very different from the pain of loneliness, and so he conjured up this Cammy, and so it's like that's why he pissed Marcel off to stab him last episode in the premiere, was so he could kind of subconsciously he wanted to be in a state where he knew he could conjure up Cammy, which obviously she's saying stuff like the fact is he could get out of here whenever he wants to, but what it comes down to is the fact is that Klaus is scared. He wants to say, like, oh, he's not worried about going back to his little girl, but going back to his little girl is what scares him the most, because he sees the way he is. He sees all the stuff. He looks back at all the stuff he's ever done, and it's always a situation of he wants to be someone that his little girl can not only be proud of, what he's afraid of most is her turning out like him, because he doesn't want her to grow up with obviously the situation that he had growing up with their father. He doesn't want her to have to deal with him in that same regard of, like, growing up hating her own father, or on the opposite spectrum, hating him like the way, well, he doesn't want to be the monster that his father was, but he doesn't want her to look at him the same way Marcel does, as, well, once again, a monster. And so for him, he's afraid that more so than anything, when he gets back in her life, that he'll just pollute her, he'll taint her in a way that she'll end up becoming more like him, and he doesn't want that. He brings up the fact is that, Vincent brought it up last episode too, that it's like, oh, Cammy believed there was a light in you, and Klaus is like, I don't believe there's a light in me, there's no good in me, I'm just darkness. But the Cammy starts, obviously, like I said, she represents kind of like what Cammy would say, and it's like, no, because out of anyone, Cammy is probably one of the few people that has the most faith in him. Probably next to her is probably Elijah. I mean, hence why Elijah is always. I mean, obviously you got to bring even more of the comparisons together because obviously the Vampire Diaries is over, but obviously that's always been a thing. It's like the comparison between the relationships. Stefan and Damon comparing to Elijah and Klaus. Only exception being like the roles are reversed. Whereas with Klaus and Elijah's the big brother always cleaning up his little brother's messes. Granted, Elijah's made some messes of his own, where we have, like, on the flip side, Stefan being the younger brother cleaning up his older brother's messes, which, granted, in that same situation, it's not like 100% innocence on either side, but it's like brothers on both ends trying to protect their brothers, so Cammy's basically telling Klaus, like, yes, you might repeat history. Who's to say that maybe the same thing that happened maybe you'll treat Hope the same way you treat Marcel, or maybe you'll end up being the same father that your father was, but you'll never know if you don't give it a try. And like, you owe that to your daughter to at very least try. So, I did like one line from Elijah early on, because like everyone's like, yeah, okay, we need to get Klaus today, and like Cole's like, no, we can't. Fact is, Marcel's there, he will kill us if we go after Klaus now. It's like, I'm saying we act a little rational about this. And then Elijah's like, no, we're getting Klaus today, even if I have to burn down the whole city. I'm like, going into a protective big brother mode, especially because for them it's also about, obviously it's reuniting their entire family, with the exception of Finn, of course. But that's something else too. I was wondering. I was like, I'm surprised that never turned into anything either. I'm sure maybe on the same way the Vampire Diaries ended with people watching over them, maybe on some level Finn is the same way too. But it's like, I'd assumed he'd end up in Cade's hell just because of, who he is. Everyone that you known across the series tended to end up there, I would think. But nevertheless. But it's also because for them, they feel like Klaus has suffered for these 5 years for the sake of protecting them. Because, I mean, it pops up in the whole conversation between Marcel and all of the families, especially like when it came to Rebecca, when they came face to face, that she was willing to stab him with the dagger that cursed her in the first place. He's like, you're really going to do that to me? Because it's like, for him, like Rebecca's saying like, okay, Klaus has suffered enough. And the fact of the matter is, the fact is that you're willing to treat Klaus like a trophy. That's not the Marcel that I once knew and loved. You're not the same man anymore. What you're doing isn't justified. But he's like, how is what I'm doing not justified? The fact is, Elijah killed me, and he brings this up to Elijah too. And it's like, Klaus stood there and did nothing. It's like, well, for one, Klaus was super pissed at Elijah what he did to you, because Klaus didn't want things to turn out that way. Because this also stems from the fact is what happened to Davina. Once again, that wasn't Klaus's fault. Like, Haley attested to it. Like, Klaus didn't want anything to do with that. He told Elijah and them not to do that, but it's for the sake of stopping Lucian, and they did that, and she ended up dying and was, eventually at the mercy of the ancestors and everything. But it's like you 100% understand why Marcel is pissed, because it's not even just that. That was just the final breaking point on everything. Not only Davina, but also him, his own death, so it's just, for him, it's like Klaus has done nothing but cause havoc and destruction all throughout time and history. And it's like, why should he get a second chance? It's because it's like, you destroyed like any happiness I've had or anyone else's happiness, all for your own selfish needs and stuff like that. Interestingly enough, I thought it was that I wonder, is it just because he was able to grab the knife in time? Because even Klaus I don't think Klaus was ever able to do it, but I guess being as powerful as he is, you see that the dagger never actually went into Marcel all the way. He was able to pull it out, so I'm guessing just with his newfound strength and everything. But it was a conversation where it's like, you have Rebecca being like, it's not like Marcel is innocent in all of this. He, just as responsible as the Mikaelson family is, that Marcel has to admit the fact is that he played his role, his part in all things transpiring the way they did. So, I don't know. It's like, it's a situation where it's like, that the faults that lie on the Mikaelson family and everything that's ever happened, and especially a lot of it heavily falls on the shoulders of Klaus, for them being in this situation, for them having as many enemies that they do, having this very situation. Because even Cammy's like, the fact is, I think that's another reason why he didn't want to leave either, because I think on some level Klaus wanted to be punished, because not only for protecting his friends, but also because, Klaus probably believes heavily that he deserves it. And whether he does or not, I mean, has he suffered enough? Like, there would be many people that would tell you no. Like, he hasn't suffered nearly enough. He's caused so much pain and hurt and death over the 1,000 years that he's been alive. So it's like, no, a measly 5 years suffering a little pain and loneliness is like, no, screw you. Like, a lot of people he's manipulated into doing some atrocities, as well as, leaving their lives behind and everything. So in a sense, like, Marcel ends up letting them go later on because Klaus is like, you need to stop this. You can try and fight us, and yes, you will kill some of us, maybe even all of us. But if you don't kill all of us, there will always be someone there to kind of, like, one of us will escape, but will seek vengeance for the death of the rest of the family. And then eventually, even if you did kill all of us, Hope would grow up and she would take on that battle, and then her children and just an endless cycle of violence that he's like, we can put an end to this by you just letting us go. Which you have Marcel being so pissed. He's like, how dare you kind of take the higher ground in this kind of trying to be all high and mighty. The fact of the matter is, he's like, no, that, going back to it, it's like, Klaus, this is all your fault. You've done nothing but hurt people around you. It's like, you had the audacity to be like, oh, I want to go back to my daughter. It's like, because even he was like, no, Hope would be better off without him, and the fact is, he's like, I'm glad I was never a Mikaelson. To me, more so than anything, he wants to claim that, he's showing them mercy just to show how different he is from the Mikaelsons. He's like, because I'm doing what y'all have never done, and that's show mercy. So he's like, I'm letting you go so that you can live every day knowing the fact is that I'm the one that let you go, that I showed you mercy, that at any moment I could have killed any of you, but I didn't. But it's going back to the same conversation that got brought up last episode in the premiere. The fact is that Marcel wouldn't do it because the same reason why he won't kill Klaus is because no matter how much he hates Klaus was still like a father to him, that on some level he still can't bring himself to kill Klaus, no matter how much Klaus has hurt him. Yes, he's brought up some very logical reasons as to why he hasn't killed Klaus, but it's like, even Rebecca brought it up. It's like, needed blood, just in case werewolves came attack. It's like, you could have drained him and just stocked up his blood for that, and just all these other reasons why he brought up last episode as reinstates him in this episode of why he kept Klaus alive this entire time. Because I think no matter how much he wants to admit it, being what he is now probably does scare him, because there is no one or nothing that can stop him. The originals can't stop him. Probably no witch alive that can stop him. He's like a very unstoppable killing machine. And to him, he's like, no, I don't have to worry about it because I'm on top of the world. I've got it under control. But I think on some level, Marcel is afraid that he will lose control. So that's why he's trying to not do things, because yes, no one can stop him. But that's the thing. Because no one can stop him, he saw all the death and destruction that Lucien caused last season, and he doesn't want to repeat the same thing because he is the exact same thing that Lucien was. So, especially being raised by Klaus, I think on some level that also eats away at him when he sees Klaus kind of has those moments of not being the monster in his eye. He's like, you're not being the monster that you are, but it's like, here I am struggling with this monster inside of me. Now, whether that's 100% true, that's just how I'm interpreting it. Maybe that'd be kind of what this season's all about too, him fighting that monster inside of him, that eventually maybe he'll lose complete control of the thing he's become. So, because obviously he's kicking them out of town, but as we've learned with Vincent, there's a new threat on the horizon, because basically he went to start looking for Adam, Maxine's son, and ended up finding this orb of light. It's the same light that Adam found at the end of the episode. But what we ended up seeing was like it was attacking Vincent, but luckily he had the charm that Maxine had given him, and it kept it at bay. Now the fact is, he saw the Ouroboros symbol or whatever, the snake eating his tail, and he's like, oh no, he knows what it is. He doesn't know exactly what the power is. I mean, at least he hasn't stated, because he does call Marcel in the episode, and he's like, something's happening, and I think it's going to cause problems for all of us. And the fact is that it is something I might have caused this. So I don't know whether this has something to do with the ancestors, or is this something that has to deal with his past, because Vincent didn't pop up until season 2 in the show. That's when he originally popped up as being possessed by Finn. I think that's the first time he popped up, right? So Vincent's past is still a little like blank to us, because the only other thing we know about Vincent's past was his wife. I mean, we kind of already know how that situation ended. I mean, because it was kind of a past situation, but then it kind of reared its ugly head in the present day and was kind of dealt with. So, because if I remember correctly, that's the body Rebecca ended up in, wasn't it? Like, she ended up in Vincent's ex-wife's body, if I remember correctly. It's been a while, so a lot of those details are like a little blocked in my mind. But so I assume it's either something heavily from his past, but I also, because I was wondering, are we on, because they keep bringing a point of bringing it up, the fact that it's like, oh, Vincent helped deal with the ancestors, and I'm like, is that really over? I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more to that, but nevertheless, I'm very curious to see what this is all about, because at the moment I saw those things, that particular development happen, I'm like, I know what this means. This means that going forward, like, it's going to be a situation that even Marcel himself can't handle. And he made such a big point of telling the Mikaelson family never to come back to New Orleans. And so it's a situation where it's like he's going to have to rely on them. He's going to have to come to them because they're the strongest people he knows, the strongest family, especially because obviously they're some of the strongest vampires. Plus they have Freya, like one of them probably most powerful witches. She's been around a long time, so she knows a lot about magic. So she'd be able to help with this particular situation. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. But also, side note, like, does everyone else know about Klaus being gone, or is that something? I feel like Marcel wouldn't be so willing to let other people know about that, because all that would do is cause more problems for him, because other people would be like, oh, Marcel's going weak, and they'll try and attack him. Maybe not. Or maybe Marcel used this as an opportunity to be like, hey, Klaus is free. If you want him, he's all yours type of situation. But I don't think so, because once again, he wants to leave their family alone. Like I said, no matter how much he hates the Mikaelson family, that was still his family at one point. So he can't 100% turn his back on them like he wants to. So I don't know. I'd be very interested to see, because like the only other person that we know that knows is his lady friend that he's working with. I don't remember her name. Why? I feel like I know that. I've seen that actress in some stuff before. I can't quite place her. I don't remember what it was exactly I know her from, but I've seen her in stuff before. But nevertheless, another element that came up was an interesting conversation between Josh and Cole, because Cole's still looking at the picture of Davina, and the fact is that, the reason why I brought Adrian up, obviously, for the thing earlier when I mentioned, was also because he brought Aiden, was the fact is that for him, after Aiden died, it took him a while to kind of like, to finally be okay. At the very least, the fact is that find himself back to being normal, some form of normalcy. And he's telling Cole, like, you'll get there someday. It'll take a while, but you'll get there. Like, you just gotta keep going long enough, because Cole cannot wait to get out of New Orleans, because the whole city just constantly reminds him of everything that's happened and everything he lost, in this particular case, Davina. I mean, we actually think about it, it's the same thing for Marcel. It's like he wants to rule a city and take back a city that obviously was his for such a long time, but take back a city that just is a constant reminder of everything and everyone you've ever lost over all this time, so maybe, eventually Marcel will have a change of heart. I feel like things aren't going to stay as good. They're obviously not going to stay as good as they are now. So even besides the fact is, whatever this thing is that attacked Vincent and possibly took Adam, I feel like there's something else kind of on the horizon that has to be dealt with, and it might be a lot closer to home, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see. So it was kind of a sweet thing that Cole did. That basically he contacted Josh's boyfriend and told him to kind of come over. And so it's kind of a situation, because even he said it, like when he snapped Josh's neck, he's like, he didn't kill Josh, even though he probably, that's kind of how the Mikaelsons do. But it was like, he's like, I'm not going to kill you. You're lucky you are essentially someone important to Davina. And at the end, Freya's asking him what that's all about. And he's like, oh, just helping a friend of a friend. Just because it's like, helping him kind of get back his normalcy. And I guess in a sense, helping himself, it feels like if Josh can get back that happiness or normalcy, then maybe there's hope for me too. So I'm very interested to see where the Mikaelson family goes from here. Klaus seeing his little girl again. I'm sure it makes him happy. Obviously, he has a smile on his face. I'm sure it makes him a little sad because he had to be away from her for 5 years, because because that was another thing too. Like, the fact is that he'd rather her remember him as like never have met him, but remember him as like, oh, Klaus, my father, the man who sacrificed himself to make sure the rest of his family is okay, rather than being the man that would be in front of her, because he feels like if he's with her, like he's done in the past, he's disappointed people. So I'm sure the last person he wants to disappoint is his little girl Hope. So There's also an interesting thing. I guess out of everyone in the family, Cole has always had the biggest issue of control, because you even see at one point like he's punching one of the vampires repeatedly. I don't know whether it's because of the whole conversation about Davina that kind of got him riled up, or just being back there kind of got him riled up, or a combination of it. But I think it's just not. I mean, mainly Cole's been violent in the more recent history, mainly because of what the ancestors did to him. But now I'm thinking like maybe there's residual effects from that, but once again I think like Cole is kind of the most bloodiest of the one, maybe next to Klaus. So I mean, because granted they did like kill a lot of people at the beginning when they were trying to replenish their strength and everything, get ready for the fight. I even had Elijah being like, you know, there's one guy kind of like gurgling or screaming, and you have Elijah being like, Cole, can you please keep it quiet? And the guy stops, and Elijah like, thank you. So I don't know. I wonder, is that going to turn into be something, or was it, like I said, just this episode type of thing? We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out too. But overall, very good episode. Super excited to see what goes on in the next episode, where our developments take us, especially about that werewolf that they're keeping around for the sake of the cure. It's like, how long is she going to stay there? I mean, does Haley know that Freya kept her captive? I would think she would, but maybe she doesn't. I mean, once again, that's kind of a situation we'll kind of have to wait to see in the next episode too. Because I mean, obviously, she'll probably still be a target from a lot of people who might find out that Klaus is still alive and everything, and they're like, "Oh, like I know who she is. I know how important she is." Especially if Marcel's lady friend might slip that information out there, just because she's like, she wouldn't want anyone to be out there that could potentially jeopardize Marcel's kingdom, something like that. Like I said, we would just have to wait and see. And now moving on to this week's episode of Grimm, another fantastic episode. Obviously, we're building upon what we learned a little bit last episode, kind of elaborating and explaining things a little bit more. The way they describe this thing, obviously, last episode was kind of described this thing, Zerstorer. It basically is like a German for destroyer. Basically, this thing is like, obviously, referred to as like a Satan or whatever, or you know, almost like a fallen angel. In a way, Moreau was talking about that place that Nick and Eve were in. It's kind of like the Garden of Eden, almost not necessarily the Garden of Eden, but it's kind of elaborate to kind of be like that, because this other place is almost like an afterlife of some sort. It's kind of like an alternate dimension that can kind of act like that, because in this world it can almost be compared to like hell, because it's like there's no fire and everything. It's a very pretty place, but the thing is, what ended up being the case is that this world is filled with obviously Vestin that are 100% vogue, and they kind of act wild and crazy. I think it's because it's like, you know, the way Monroe was describing it, it's like, oh, a place where hell is from, with the fire burns within. So it's like their hell is the fact is that they lose complete control in this world. So it's like they're just kind of almost like wild savage animals essentially. So, but the entire time this Zerstorer thing wasn't fighting Nick and Eve out to kill them. It was just basically fighting them back, but nothing they did worked. Eve's powers didn't work. Nick couldn't do anything against this thing. He was just kind of toying with them. And it turns out the reason why is because this thing needs Nick to get itself out. Because obviously today's the day that all the prophecy, everything that was on that cloth has been leading up to. That basically this whole thing was a setup from the beginning. It attacked Eve so that Eve will come attack it, so Nick will come rescue her. And the moment Nick is pulled out, it needs a Grimm to keep the portal open. A Grimm going out keeps the portal open, so it was able to get out. And so just so much went down in this episode. I was right about the stick. I felt like once we saw that thing staff, I was like, wait, that's what this is? Turns out that be the case. Apparently, this thing's staff has been around a very long time, and apparently it's a staff from different legends. Like, obviously, it's like Moses' staff, as well as apparently it was a staff David used when he slayed Goliath or whatever. But it's just been it popped up on a lot of history and stuff like that. And that basically the staff was broken into 100 pieces, but before Zerstorer could put it back completely together, he was sealed away in that other world, and Nick holds on to the final piece. That's why that thing is so powerful and does what it does. Because in retrospect, it's like, I don't think I brought it up last episode, but the way he was pushing Nick and Eve back and the way he was using the power now, it's very similar to how the stick acted when Nick when those cops try to take it from Nick, like what was it, like the second episode of the season. And so it really does make the question, why is it that Nick can use it? Because it seems like no one else can really hold on to it, because the moment like Eve tried to pick it up, it started hurting her. And as we saw, it did that to the cop and blew the cops away and kind of put them in that almost like catatonic state. I don't know if they were necessarily killed, but the fact is that Nick could harness its power. Is it just because he's a Grimm, or is it because it chose him? But this is why the Crusaders were bringing up the fact is, obviously, it's not just the stick by itself that would cause destruction or whatever. It's the fact is that this thing, when its power with the full staff, could do unimaginable things, because its staff is like literally known for having the power of gods, which in retrospect explains why it can do what it can do, opening a portal world into another world. I guess that's also why the stick didn't go through. It's not because the stick is like, oh, I don't belong there. It's because the stick couldn't go through. I mean, it didn't make you wonder, why was Zerstorer able to have his staff in that world? So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's something we'll never really 100% get to know in this episode. I mean, at all throughout the series, is knowing this thing's backstory, what it is, what it wants. I mean, obviously, we know what it wants. It wants Diana. Man, and then later when we find out, like, because Diana has a nightmare about it, and in her nightmare, it looks at Kelly. It's not just Diana it wants. It also wants Kelly, too. And I think, now, obviously, it wants Diana because Diana's very powerful. She's special, and it wants her to be, essentially, his bride to eventually have many children with, basically to give birth to, I guess, many more things, many more, maybe other Vessin, to basically bring destruction upon the world. And I'm guessing he needs Kelly, because Kelly is what he is, because Kelly's special too, because he is the child of a Grimm and a Hexen beast. Now I'm assuming it's because, probably more so than anything, Kelly is probably more because the fact is that he is a Grimm. I don't know whether it's just that or just Kelly himself being special. I mean, just like Diana being special because of who her parents are, maybe the same thing applies to Kelly, because Kelly's, just like Diana's one of a kind, maybe Kelly's one of a kind too. And maybe he wants to use Kelly bring Kelly on as kind of like his prince of destruction or something like that. Or maybe, like I said, like I was saying, like he needed a Grimm to get out of the world. Maybe he wants to use Kelly as a means of being like, this way he has a Grimm that he can raise as his own and use as his own to be able to go in and out, go forth across maybe not just that dimension, any dimension that might be closed off to him. I don't know. Or maybe there's a lot more to this than we know, because I mean, this thing, because like I said, we've already seen what this thing can do, bringing people back from the dead and healing wounds. And it's like, that's just what this thing can do, this small piece by itself. Like, combined with the rest of the stuff, there's no telling what this thing can do. Especially because the fact is that he was able to touch someone with it, electrocute him to the point the dude's eyes exploded. Then at one point, he turns it into a snake and has it attack someone, but then it returns to, like, this thing has literally the power to alter. It seems like it can not necessarily bend reality around itself, but it can alter itself into many different forms and power. It seems like that's where most of its power comes from. So it's like, because also a question got brought up is like, how did this thing get it in the first place? Was his staff originally this thing, and then other people throughout history got it? What if we end up finding out in this situation? It's something I was kind of thinking of. What if this thing is actually, just kind of random thought that I actually sat here and was thinking, what if this thing is actually a Grimm that was possessed by the power of the staff, and it turned that Grimm into a Vessin, and that now the same thing might happen to Nick, that is an endless cycle, that the staff corrupts. Like, at first, obviously it has great power, but eventually it corrupts the user and turns them into the monster. Maybe Zerstorer is someone that the staff is passed down to each person, and I mean, most likely won't be the case, but what if it was? That'd be kind of interesting. Like I said, because literally, obviously, the next episode is the series finale, and I don't know if we really get any background on this thing or not. What I do appreciate is the fact is we have trouble coming back into town with news that Black Claw has been dealt with. All the cells have been dead. I mean, that was him just covering up. It's like, so you go into the series finale not worrying about that. I was thinking that was still something that might have to be dealt with in the future or not. I was wondering if they want to bring Trouble back, and luckily enough they did. But it's just like Trouble picked the best time to come back. She said she came back because she felt something. So, dude, just so many crazy things about this episode. The fact is, an interesting thing too is that the place they decided to hide them out, Diana, Kelly, Adeline, as well as Sean are going to be there to protect them. The place they end up in is the same place where this all started for Nick. It's the first case he had for at the very beginning of the series, like dealing with a Blutbad, who was a bad guy. Which I love Renard's remark, like, "Oh yeah, I don't remember this guy coming through the system. It's like he left us no choice." But also, I guess because it's been such a long time, because I'm pretty sure that happened, what was that, like season 2? The whole Renard and Nick thing is like settling about the whole key situation. Is where he handed his key over to Nick, like when they kind of first started joining alliances, like when they, because yeah, that was after the whole Juliet. I think that was roughly around like the end of that was kind of like the mid-season finale type of thing, at the end of the first half of the second season and at the beginning of the second half of the second season. But maybe, I don't know if I recognized that then, maybe then, but like I said, that was a while back, so I don't remember that as well. But definitely, like, it was kind of interesting, like, all right, that really happened at the same place too. Like, so many things happened there. Kind of going back, because like this season kind of brought it up, like how so much stuff led to where they are now. Because they're like, yeah, me and Nick formed that group, we formed that pact together because we couldn't let you get the key because you were working with the Royals at the time. And she's like, oh yeah, kind of crazy to think about. The fact is that now I was that way then, and here I am now with a baby, had a baby with you and a baby with you. And Nick's like, yeah, simpler times. It's like, dude, things got seriously complicated as this series. It gives you that giddy feeling. It's just like, dude, just going full circle is kind of where we kind of ended up. And another interesting thing too was, and it was, like I said, I'm not as worried about it. Last episode kind of put my mind more at ease, but this episode kind of brought up the fact is that Eve wasn't a Hexen beast anymore. Somehow when she left that world, I guess because it's like, oh, all that hellfire, like that burning anger that's kind of inside of you, like that makes Vessens go wild, it was kind of ripped out of her when they came back to this world. So she's no longer a Vessen, but she isn't Juliet still. She still is Eve. But the thing is, like, she kind of looks at Nick and was like, yeah, but the fact is that we're never quite the same. Because she doesn't even know if it's a good thing. Because last episode, she admitted, she was like, I still don't know who or what I am. Because it's like, now this just complicates it even more. Because it's like, I mean, does it still make her Eve? Because she's like, I'm not Juliet, but she's no longer Eve the Hexen beast. She's just Eve the person. Now, some of that is like the way they were looking at each other, maybe going, does this mean that this is going to possibly spark something else? But then it's like, no, because, because like I kept throwing it out there. It's like, oh, is it going to complicate things? It's like, nope, it doesn't. And like, I think they've set in stone, it's like Adeline and Nick all the way through, which I'm so happy about. I'm like, okay, I was like, okay. Like I said, I've said it countless times, it's the relationship I didn't know I wanted. And it's like, I'm so happy they ended up a couple. It's like, when you look at they have a love story for the ages. Started off as enemies, tried to kill each other on a few occasions, screwed up each other's lives on many occasions, and now they have like a child together and they're in love. And it's just like that moment of like, him hugging her, because you could see it on his face. Like, it's a situation where he didn't know if like, Nick didn't want to say it, but you could see it on his face that like, this is a situation he didn't know if he was going to come back from it or not. I mean, because like I said, this thing is like crazy powerful. I am curious to know, is it just with the staff, or does this thing, like, it seems like all of its powers resonate from the staff. So at least that's where my mindset is about that. So the real crazy twist in the episode is when we end up seeing this thing. I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting, little side note. Two side notes. One, that the thing is trying to learn human language because it's copying what it hears other people say. Two, the actor who plays it, I kept wondering, like, I had to look his name up because I think I looked him up previously, but I kept wondering, why do I know you from things? His name is Will Trevall, I think. He's an Australian actor, which is like, awesome. But nevertheless, I was like, I knew the most recent thing I'd seen him in. Some of the most recent things. Obviously, he plays Nottingham in Once Upon a Time. He also played that human target character in this season of Arrow. He's only popped up in one episode so far. And then that was like the thing that I definitely remembered him for. I think I looked it up before, but I forgot it. Because I think I made a whole deal about the fact is, but he was in Jessica Jones. He played Simpson in Jessica Jones. And that's how I was like, oh, right. Because now you're playing a DC character. And then but previously you're technically you're also playing a Marvel character. So I think that's what was in my mind before. But I was like, yeah. So I just, it seems that he's the actor. Obviously, he's playing the human form of Zerstorer. What's kind of interesting is the fact is I'm curious, why is it that Eve left there with part of like her losing her Hex and Beast powers, when the fact is when he came here, obviously he kind of vogued into a human form, but he didn't lose his Vogue power. He can still Vogue too. I'm guessing it's because when Eve left, she wasn't fully transformed, so her Hex and Beast side was trying to creeping to the surface, so it had not completely set in. If it had, and then she went through the portal, maybe she would have gone back to being like, she'd be able to keep her powers, but turns out that's not the case, so. But the crazy thing that we saw at the end of the episode is first we see this thing killed Wu, and then it killed Hank. I was like, wait, what? And I really halfway expected to kill Nick, but it didn't. I mean, because that's where the episode ends. I was like, because I was seeing Trouble getting closer, and I was like, Trouble, don't get close to this thing. Please don't tell me they brought you back literally to kill you near the end of the series. Because I think I brought this last episode. Like, it is a series finale. They can start dropping people like crazy. But to me, I don't think it's going to be that simple because of the stick. You know, I think maybe Nick will try it, or maybe at the very least, this thing will take the stick from Nick and form the staff, and maybe like when it's all said and done, Nick will use the power to kind of reverse time, or at least, you know, undo death and bring Wu and Hank back to life, because it's like it can't end like this for them. It just can't. And I mean, I didn't see anything of the series finale. I literally saw Nick opening a chest. That's all I saw. So I'm literally going into the series finale knowing nothing, and I'm super excited because, like I said, I'm a little sad, but I'm more so than anything, I'm pumped. And what's probably going to happen is the moment we get down to that last minute, I'm probably going to start tearing up because I'm like, it's over. Grimm is just, I'm just going to say it like it's a fantastic series. I'll probably reiterate this more. I'll probably gush about it even more when the series finale happens next week. But it's just like, if you've ever, like, I just, once again, just recommend this series to someone. Like, I think it's really worth people's time. Like, I learned about this show because of my cousin. She was really into it. And then she was like, oh. And I, one day, like, around the time the show was in its second season, I was like, all right, I'm going to check it out. Watch the first episode, immediately hooked, and then just kept watching episode after episode, and I was like, this is so good. So I've been a fan ever since. So I consider myself very fortunate that I was able to, it's because I'm not always that fortunate where I'm able to watch a show throughout its progress. So like I think around the time I started watching it, it was like maybe like a third of the way through the second season. So I kind of got into it early enough, and I always feel bad when I come into a series pretty late. There's been plenty of engagements, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm very curious to see how this all turns out, what goes on. It's like I said, the only way you can stop this thing is like everyone's going to have to come together. You get Nick, Adeline, Monroe, I mean, probably not Rosalie because she's pregnant and everything, but just get like, you know, Sean, to just everyone fighting together to take this thing down. I'm thinking this also going to come down to that staff. Nick is going to have to get his hands on, because obviously the stick works for him. So for whatever reason, it clicks with him. I don't know. Like I said, that's why I'm like, there has to be more to what this thing is. So possibly, maybe there is more to it being a Grimm, the reason why it can use the staff. Maybe only Grimms can have access to it, proving my thoughts that maybe it is a Grimm. Once again, just a fun thought I just had sitting here, but maybe that'll be the case, but most likely not. It'd be cool, but I don't know. Like I said, because I don't know if we'll ever really get to understand this thing, because it might not be important. It's like, yo, the big baddie showed up, which like I said, find it so funny. Like, literally, kind of very much like the Vampire Diaries. Literally, the big baddie shows up like the very last episodes of the series. So I just thought that was just kind of interesting. So I'm very interested to see how this all goes down, because I will not accept the fact is that Wu and Hank are dead. Something's going to happen to change that. It has to. If we walk away with this and Wu and Hank stay dead, I'm going to be so pissed. Especially because they brought up that whole conversation of like, oh man, when it's all said and done, it's like, can you believe like all this craziness? It's like, man, I wouldn't have believed this a year ago. And Hank's like, year ago, it's years for me, and it's just like, oh, do you think we would have been better off not knowing? He's like, I don't know. I mean, at this point, it does beg the question: are we just crazy? And it's like, now that's kind of making me worried that we even have to think of something like that. So it's like, dude, like, what does this also mean too? Because this thing attacked the precinct too. So I mean, granted, we don't know if a lot of people might chalk that up as like, oh, maybe there's something in the water, or maybe it's a situation where it's like a lot of people who saw it are dead. So I have no idea how this is all going to play out. So, because I was thinking, like, the fact is they made a remark like that. It's like, not unless Nick takes his stick and rewinds time. I hope he doesn't. I hope it's not a situation where it's like, just for the sake of the series, I hope it's not a situation where we erase everything. Why? Because that would mean like destroying everything they've built over the course of the series. But what I would think is kind of interesting is if, because obviously what happened to Eve, what if that happened to all Vesson? What if people had to start living their lives being like, well, if there was no more need for Grimms because Vessons were wiped from this world because of what Nick does? Like he puts his thing back and it ends up sucking all of the Vesson essence out of people or something like that. Most likely in that case. Like I said, last episode I brought it up, I'm thinking like maybe it'll end with Nick kind of like, oh, gotta get to work. Him, obviously in my mind, Hank and Wu are like, yo, gotta get back to this Vesson work. So, but like I said, we will just have to wait and see. I'm super excited, a little saddened, but more so than anything excited to see how this series ends. And now moving on to this week's episode of Sleepy Hollow. So in this episode, we got to look at the future that Molly's from. Obviously, we got glimpses of it. We got even more, a slightly more bigger glimpse at it. Got some answers to certain things. We didn't get answers to everything I wanted to know, but we don't know what happened to Jake or Alex. But what we do see in the future is that we see an older Jenny, and she's basically teaching like a younger generation. It's like, oh, you need to beware of the Dreyfus. Is kind of what they call him. I guess it's almost like making it almost synonymous with the devil, I guess, being who and whatever he is. She talks about the fact that it's like, oh, he's just a normal man. But it's like, I mean, why would she? I mean, I guess it's a situation where she's trying to build up the future army to be like, stand up and take back America for what it was before Dreyfus kind of took it and pushed his own values onto it. Because it's like, I guess if you tell them like, oh, Dreyfus is actually immortal and what you do to him couldn't really hurt him, and it deter from the fight, and it's like the point is to kind of inspire other people to, in case anything ever happened to them, which it does, they'd be inspired to take up the fight. Because I'd previously wondered, I was like, oh, I wonder where the Four Horsemen play in this too. It's like, what happened to them when it was said and done? Well, it seems that they're basically his personal guard. Anytime people step out of line, he doesn't probably need an actual army. I mean, he probably has like a group of people that, they're there to serve as him. But I mean, at the same time, it's like, would he really need them when he has literally the Four Horsemen and no one can stop them or hurt them? So, but we ended up seeing like, Molly, and she's there attacking Jenny because we kind of learn more like why she goes by the name Laura. Laura is the name that Malcolm had given her, so that's why she's like, no, don't call me Molly. No one, because basically Dreyfus had manipulated her and brainwashed. I mean, because she was such a little girl, and we ended up finding out more about her situation. The fact is that after Diana died, like basically she was kind of put in foster care, just bounced around until Dreyfus came and adopted her. Which it's like he took such an interest in her. Why did he wait till that moment? I mean, maybe legally, paperwork and stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel like he could have found a way around that being who and what he is. But then I was like, no, what the point probably was is he wanted her to be in a situation where she be in a state of suffering when she's at her lowest. He comes and becomes that bright shining light that helps her. At least that's where my mentality is about that. So we ended up getting a glimpse at kind of what he ended up making her. Because I was thinking like, oh, she figured it all out as a little girl, like Crane told her as a little girl. But it's like, no, it took a couple years, like until her, like, I mean, I'm not really sure how old she is. I'd say she's in her 20s maybe. But it took her a while to find out like, oh, Dreyfus lied to her. Because it took Jenny being like, no, he's lied to you this entire time. He's saying Crane's dead, but in fact, this Crane's still alive. And in fact, this person right here, this Horseman of War is actually your mom. She's like, no, you're full of crap. And Jenny, using a knife that can actually hurt them, ends up breaking the mask off, and Molly ends up seeing her mom underneath before Jenny gets killed. But obviously Dreyfus continues to lie to her, and then Molly ends up, kind of deciding to figure stuff out for herself, and she ends up and goes and meets Crane, even though Crane is supposed to be dead because he was supposed to be executed a long time ago. Because what we end up finding out is like the lie that he told her was that essentially what she knew as a girl, that Crane said that him and me were a witness. We were both witnesses, but then he kind of twisted the truth to be like, no, Crane just lied about that. The fact is, your mom figured out the truth and was trying to protect you, but they killed her. So that's why that's why she was so easy to latch on to Dreyfus, because she was a little girl at the time. And because also Crane also said that they said that she would never have to be alone. Being a witness meant she'd never have to be alone, but she spent most of her life alone. So she harbored anger towards them also in that. It's like, you killed my mom, plus you left me all alone. So, but I mean, obviously that was all part of Dreyfus's manipulation. I an interesting thing, well, two things. I'll kind of start with the one that's right there in front of my mind, and that's, I don't know if I brought this up last episode, kind of theorizing why he would leave Crane alive, but this episode kind of put it more in perspective. So if I did say it before, I'll just reiterate it here, like, whether my thoughts are right or not. But nevertheless, it turns out, like, to my assumption, it never really outright said it, because Crane was like, oh, he wants, doesn't want me dead, because this way he has both witnesses under his control, me locked up and you under his thumb, treating you like the daughter he never had, or something like that. To me, I think I chalk that up as to, because if he killed Crane, all it would do is the same thing that happened from Abby to Molly. The power of a witness would just pass on to the next person. And at least if he has Crane, that means he always knows who the witness is. But if it leaves Crane, it's like he won't be able to track down the other witness. I mean, he could using Molly, because the witnesses are always drawn to each other, but then he'd have to go back on telling Molly everything, like make it like, okay, the whole witness thing wasn't 100% a lie, and that would kind of it would contradict everything he's created in her mind. Side note, I ended up finding out this episode because I ended up seeing her name. Did not realize the actress that plays older Molly is Sachio Gabriel. I know I just butchered her name. Sachio Gabriel. I'm not familiar with a lot of her work. Apparently she was in the Avatar movie. I think the character she played, because I've never seen the Avatar movie, but it's been such a long time since I saw Avatar. I think she played Princess Yuki in the movie. I think that's her name. I don't know. But nevertheless, she also did apparently a voice of a character, I think a main character in Legend of Korra. Granted, I only ever saw the first season. I've kind of already established that. Nevertheless, like, the one reason why I know her, and it's kind of a cool reason, yet kind of, I mean, it's a weird reason to know an actor, but at the same time, it's also kind of depressing, that I know about her because of William Haynes from SourceFed / People Be Like. If you know where SourceFed's situation is, I mean, long story short, today was SourceFed Studios in general. This was their last day, so that's why I'm like, it's kind of a depressing reason. That's actually kind of bumming me out, even just talking about it, because I've been bummed out all week since finding out. But nevertheless, like, at one point it came up during the table talk. I know I'm saying stuff that may not pertain to you, might even know what I'm talking about. But Will brought up the fact is, Sachio Gabriel came up in conversations like a girl he had a crush on. They even had her on a SourceFed podcast one time, and it was just like, I was like, I think it's because, like, the last time I saw her, like, was in that particular podcast, and I think she had her hair in a ponytail. I think I could be completely wrong, so maybe that's why it didn't click in my head. But it's just like, because I've only seen her like that one time, so I mean, it's like not like I recognize her face, but seeing her name, I was like, oh, that's you, isn't it? I know I'm completely like wasted so much time explaining that, but it's just something I had to kind of put out there. I just thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Side note, like, just from like seeing her talk on that podcast, she seems like a pretty chill lady. Like, she seems really like down to earth and cool. But enough about that. Obviously, this episode's all about trying to save Crane from being the Horseman of War. But an interesting development came about when everyone was trying to save Crane, and that interesting development was Henry returns. At least some form of him, because I'd completely forgot about it. That episode where that demon trapped Crane into his own mind, like the goo from J Street that he got on his boot that gave birth to this thing. Like, they had it in a jar, and I completely forgot about it until it popped up in this episode. I was like, right, that's totally a thing, because we saw a face in it. Basically, it latched onto the knife that had Crane's blood on it, and basically Henry was reborn. In a sense, he's saying like, oh, I was born from Crane's memories, and combined with the blood of the Horsemen of War, I was kind of reborn. And so it comes into, I love Diana being like, well, that's Crane's son, but he's so old. She's like, and then you have Ginny being like, yeah, say that to your grown daughter over there. She's like, okay, fine, you got a point. But he has this whole thing about, oh, he's trying to be the good, he just wants to help out. He wants to help, save Crane. It's like, oh, this is what, I was reborn, I'm a different person now, which I'm gonna go ahead and talk about. The fact is, so full of crap. Because even Ginny's in a situation where she's like, she doesn't know she 100% trusts him or not, just because obviously he's helped out in the past on certain occasions. I mean, obviously in the beginning when he was pretending to be the Sin Eater, when like Abby and Crane first met him before he revealed his true identity. Then, as well as even sometime after being the Horseman of War, because he ended up killing the person who helped make him into the Horseman of War. Like I said, I bring him up so much, you think at one point I'd actually look the demon's name up and because I keep never bothering to look it up, so every time I bring him up in conversation, I'm like, yeah, the demon from season 1 and 2, the main antagonist. But nevertheless, he ended up killing him, for the sake of more so his mother, but kind of for the sake of Crane too, because even though he, obviously he has very complex feelings when it comes to Crane, so it's kind of hard to say whether or not, because Jenny was like, it's hard to say which Henry we're dealing with that would tell us whether or not he can be trusted or not. Obviously, Joe ends up breaking him out later on in the episode, and he's like, okay, and lo and behold, I will become your new horseman after everything was said and done with Crane, which I'll get to later on. But once Crane is saved, it's like they need a new horseman. So I was like, oh, so they're going to go after Diana again? It's like, they don't need to because he's volunteering. And it's like, it will, because the reason why things didn't work out between Crane and the Horsemen of War, because the Horsemen of War didn't have 100% a latch on him like the other horsemen do their hosts, because they had time to be prepared for. Crane was just kind of like, he was never prepared for. Was Diana ever prepared? Maybe certain things that they've done, pushing her, like maybe even the whole situation of using Molly's kind of pushing her to her imaginary friend situation happening that almost killed her. Maybe that was all part of pushing this forward to make Diana into a horseman. Maybe that's what that was all about too. Maybe not, because it just seems like you're saying that Crane wasn't really prepared, but it's like, was Diana? So I can only assume a lot of stuff that's happened to her and Molly, it's been because of that. So nevertheless, Henry's willing to retake his throne reclaim his power as the Horseman of War. Now the question is, like, the way he's talking and everything, he doesn't seem like is he just a manifestation? Like, did that goo ended up bringing Henry back by mixing with that blood? Is this like really technically Henry, or is it just a Henry from his memories? Because it's like, really, it goes down to an existential thing of like, what is reality and what it means to exist and be someone who, as long as you have that person's memories, and feel the way that person felt, that makes you that person, right? So even if he is a fake Henry, at the very least, he's still Henry because he has all his memories and feelings and stuff like that. So it still makes him qualified for being the Horseman of War. What I'm interested in is this, obviously, because he brings up the fact is that he's playing the team, that they're like idiots for kind of even for a second believing him, like, oh, I'm the son that my father always, my father wants to remember, like, this version of me and my dad always wanted to be between me and him, and not the version of me that existed where we had problems and I tried to kill him and hated him. So I'm curious, because obviously Joe broke him out, but what's probably going to happen is Joe's going to put him back and he's going to feign ignorance, like, oh, he never got out. So he's going to be working with probably Dreyfus and Joe to become the Horseman of War again and everything, and help them while also playing, the team. Maybe that'll be the case, maybe not. Maybe he'll just stay going. It's like they go back and he's going, and it's just, I feel like it's probably going to be a lot more effective if he stays there, if he plays both sides, if he plays their, like, he acts as a double agent, because that way he can get at Crane, because this way, if he can kind of break Crane down, it will mean, because out of anyone, he's the one person that could probably hit Crane emotionally, probably, which also begs the question, maybe this might all be about also bringing his mom back to life, dude. Maybe this won't just be outright revenge and wanting to destroy them because he holds so much animosity towards them. Maybe, because this version of him I don't even know if this version of him knows about Katrina being dead. No, because he is born from Crane's memory, so what Crane remembers and knows, he knows. Possibly, if that's how that works. So he probably remembers the fact is that Katrina is dead because he died before Katrina. That's what set her off to do the whole spell, which is actually the same spell that Crane gives to Molly to use. So. But kind of really quickly getting to it is the whole saving Crane situation. I thought that was kind of pretty badass. I also love the fact is that we temporarily go back to Sleepy Hollow for a little bit for the sake of trying to save Crane and everything. And I also like that representation of like his psyche, because it's kind of what the whole Horseman of War trying to do, is trying to break down his psyche so it's a lot easier to control him. And the fact is that he's in kind of that container / pillar type of thing, and it's constantly changing colors because it represents all his emotions. But Molly kind of remembering everything because she tapped into Diana and kind of like remembered some of the stuff she remembered as a child, but kind of seen things through Diana's memories as she tapped into her when she was using the spell, to kind of get inside of Crane's mind. She was able to luckily set him free, and he was able to not only free himself from the horseman, he was actually able for a moment, actually able to control it, and he ended up killing all those Hessian soldiers that were brought back by Joe, because they were obviously representing, they're the means needed to revive the Horsemen of Death to full strength. Granted, yeah, they got killed, but Joe had already sucked up enough power needed to heal. So Death is already on his way to being recovered, if he's not already by the time the next episode comes around. But I did love the fact is that, things are a little weird and awkward, obviously, for Diana, because it's like, okay, here's my daughter. It's like asking all these questions. So it's like, so do you still draw? Do you play soccer? She's like, Mom, my life wasn't like that. But luckily, the fact is I've come back in time and changed things. That means your Molly, because your Molly and me are very different people, because I've changed the past. Your Molly doesn't grow up to be me, because she's like, the fact is that she believed Dreyfus, so she did a lot of bad things. She never really went into details, but as we can see, what happened with Jenny, I can only assume something similar happened to Alex and Jake. Just assumptions. But before I get to that, I like the fact is that we do see that bit of a jokey relationship she has with her, because she's like, yeah, you need to be, you shouldn't, because like, oh, what we need for ingredient, dragon spine, and then Molly's like, yeah, you don't want to joke about dragon spine. Like, I had a friend who got in some real serious trouble about it. She's like, you serious? She's like, no, Mom, you're so gullible, like as you've always been. And even joking when she came back, it's like, yeah, Crane had a message for you. Yeah. Get me that, what was it, like that cell phone I always wanted, as well as those earrings, the ones that's like, yeah, it's just like still keeping that humorous side, like, even when it's all said and done, even though she's a little older, that's still her mom. So I'm sure for her, because she grew up for so many years not having her mom around, but obviously she missed her, so it's like joking around with her and stuff, it probably makes her feel good, like, feels that emptiness inside of her, that she kind of felt for so long. That emptiness, and kind of subsides her rage a little bit. But this does, what I think is kind of interesting, is what this means going forward. Because Molly, Laura, is still here, but obviously, present day Molly too. So it's like, is there going to be a paradox situation if you want to break down like time travel and everything? Because I thought that's what she meant, like, I'm going to go get you. And I thought that's what she was like, no, we're not going to go get Molly because we don't know what that means. What if I bump into her and it causes a whole thing? Because, I think that's no longer an issue, because technically the time that Molly/Laura came from no longer exists. Even if the timeline changed a little bit, her future doesn't, maybe it's a situation where it's still a constantly developing situation, so her future kind of exists to a certain extent, so that's why, because I was thinking when it was all said and done, when they saved Crane and everything, she would disappear, but she's still here, which I'm cool about, just because it's like, oh, I want to keep her around, because I want to see how this dynamic grows. It's like, obviously, her and her younger self probably meet at one point. It's like, oh, who are you? It's like, I'm Laura. It's like, oh, nice to meet you, Laura. I'm Molly. Nice to meet you, Molly. Just it being weird. Also in the side of my brain, I'm like, where this could all go, because I get the feeling like they're not going to keep her around forever, and I don't even think it's going to be a situation where she's like, oh, I can't never go back to my time, so I'll live the rest of my life here. It's like either something's going to happen, like obviously her being in this time, like time changing and stuff. Like I said, it's kind of like as time travel stuff has shown me, depending on what time travel stuff you watch, time is very malleable, and it takes a while for it to completely settle. So maybe she's only here momentarily before her future is completely wiped away, so she'll disappear. Or maybe we'll find a situation where I feel like the story could end up going is where she ends up dying or something, and then the other Molly kind of holds on to her, and they like fuse together, and it's like they kind of become a whole, it's like she kind of gets absorbed into her younger self or something. I don't know, maybe like her experiences and stuff like that, maybe not necessarily memories and stuff. I don't know, just some random thought that was crossing my mind. So, because the thing is, like, even Laura can't help them going forward, because like, yeah, she probably knows history and knows what Dreyfus did to do what he did, but it's like things have changed now, so obviously things are going to play out a little or even a lot differently, so she won't be able to tell them like, oh, this and that's going to happen. So it's definitely going to be very interesting going forward with like the new developments that have happened in this. I'm super excited to see what goes down. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live the life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.